Hi, I'm Evan McLaughlin, and today we'll discuss Lincoln's seventh and final debate against Stephen Douglas during the famous Lincoln-Douglas debates. For the purposes of our discussion today, anything I highlight in blue, as demonstrated up here, will be a point that connects to Lincoln's thesis or a key part in his argument's development. Anything highlighted in yellow will be an indication of Lincoln recognizing that Judge Douglas is trying to employ a logical fallacy, the straw man argument against him, which is where a debate opponent misrepresents an argument to make it easier to refute, and typically they do that by disregarding what the person actually said in the debate. And the last point, or the last key point for our discussion, is about heuristics, which is a very advanced type of debate skill where a speaker will actually reframe the debate through asking questions or phrasing situations, and in their opponent's time that they're allotted to respond to that type of question or that situation, they're forced to really undermine their own position and potentially even contradict their own position or their beliefs, which weakens their position and makes it easier to win the debate. So before we jump in talking about this source in general, there's some overarching context that we really need to recognize here. So first and foremost, the Lincoln-Douglas debates are occurring in 1858. In a larger sense, the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which was a measure passed by Congress, largely supported by Stephen Douglas, to employ popular sovereignty, which is the residents of Kansas, the Kansas-Nebraska Territory, voting to determine whether they would become a slave state or a free state. As you might imagine, this led to tremendous corruption and violence as fighting broke out in Kansas to determine Kansas's future as a free state or a slave state. This is also further complicated by a Supreme Court decision, the Dred Scott decision in 1857, which so ordered that slaves, they really had no rights. They weren't even American citizens, and therefore they were just property. Therefore, a slave owner could just take their slave with them no matter where they traveled, even if that was a free state. So that one part alone really overturns the Missouri Compromise, which had kind of kept an uneasy peace between the North and the South, the slave-owning states and the non-slave-holding states. But with the Dred Scott decision, slaves can be brought anywhere, and the Free State division kind of crumbles, especially when we move into the territories. Now, some more immediate context regarding the Lincoln-Douglas debates. They occurred between August 21st and October 15th, 1858, and they began with Lincoln's challenge to Stephen Douglas to have a series of public debates to argue and really show the crowd in Illinois who deserves to be sent to Congress to fill a seat in the Senate. There were 7 debates in total, and the final debate at Alton, which is the one we're talking about today, is roughly halfway located on the north-south axis of Illinois. So Lincoln and Douglas should expect a mix of pro-slavery and free soil elements in their audience. And of course, we also need to be respect the fact that Elijah Lovejoy, the famous abolitionist, he was actually murdered, and his printing press for his abolitionist newspaper was destroyed in 1837. So certainly those in Illinois are aware of the problems caused by slavery and slavery's expansion well before Douglas and Lincoln even show up on site. So right here, so the stage is set right here. We've got the New Republican Party represented by Abraham Lincoln focusing on keeping slavery out of the territories, matching up against the Democratic Party, which problematically endorsed popular sovereignty, which is that solution to slavery in the territories where the territories' residents vote to determine their free state or slave state status. So really, Lincoln sets out in his debate statement at Alton to argue that the expansion of slavery are really the root cause of America's problem. Not only is it the root cause of America's problem, it's also a moral wrong, and slavery must be put on its path toward, as Lincoln would say, its ultimate extinction. So really, he is emphatically stating the Republican Party platform to keep slavery bottled up in the South, where it already exists, And these debates, because they're published in so many national newspapers, here is a way for Lincoln to really spread the party's message to a very broad audience. And Lincoln uses, or he recognizes, the straw man fallacy of logic. And he also uses here aesthetics to focus the debate on slavery's expansion, to sort of cut away all of Douglas's distractions and really stop slavery's expansion and recognize slavery as a moral wrong. So as we begin analyzing Lincoln's statement here on this amended transcript from the House Divided at Dickinson.edu, Lincoln is responding to Douglas's accusation that really the expansion of slavery and slavery itself are really not causing all the stress and fracturing and warfare we see in Bleeding Kansas and all this very caustic language in the press. And Lincoln says, look at all these examples, the Missouri Compromise, the nullification question. He even cites some examples of religious groups splitting up. The Presbyterian General Assembly we see here, the Unitarian Church. And Lincoln says, and here you see his thesis statement highlighted in blue here, and the crowd, as noted with the applause, recognizes his argument that really it is slavery's expansion that is stirring up the society and politics and religion and literature and morals. Really, it's slavery that's behind all of this violence. And then Lincoln, we see him first use here aesthetics to frame the debate and really point out a weakness in Judge Douglas's position. Lincoln asks, is this really the work of politicians? Is that irresistible power which for 50 years has shaken the government and agitated the people to be stilled and subdued by pretending that it is an exceedingly simple thing that we ought not talk about it? Clearly, the crowd, by great cheers and laughter, his supporters at least recognize Lincoln's point. But Lincoln is really doing something crafty here. He's saying that, okay, now obviously the answer is no. Just because politicians talk about this issue, that doesn't make it that doesn't make slavery the divisive issue that it is. But if if Douglas says yes, he is showing that he stands behind a ridiculous and kind of batty argument. But if he says no, he exposes himself as a liar. So right then and there, from the very opening of the debate, we see Lincoln forcing Douglas to contend with his assertion that politicians are the ones stirring up all this slavery agitation, when in reality the problem runs much deeper. Moving right along, we see Lincoln recognize Douglas's his attempt to use a fallacy of logic to undermine Lincoln's position. Now, Lincoln, let's be clear here, Lincoln never said that the Republican Party was trying to get rid of slavery in the slave states where it already existed. Judge Douglas was trying to argue that to try to sway the crowd, creating a straw man argument, to get them to sort of react emotionally. Douglas is hoping that the crowd is going to ignore Lincoln's assertion that, hey, he only wants to keep slavery out of the territories. And you see Lincoln follow up the recognition of the straw man argument fallacy with him reinforcing his thesis that he's saying here, the new territory shall be kept free from it being slavery while in the territorial condition. And as a side note, it's really a sign of weakness when as in a debate, you ignore your opponent's argument and really misrepresent the facts. So again, even though Douglas attempts to get Lincoln to lose focus, Lincoln brings the argument back to the essential issue, stopping slavery's spread. So here we see Lincoln follow up a restatement of his thesis with an example of aesthetics. So while Judge Douglas tried to contend to the crowd that they really had no business worrying about how another territory voted, whether in favor of slavery or in favor of being a free state, Lincoln shows that really that assertion does not work, and he reframes this debate so he forces Douglas to contend with this type of situation and damage his own position as he answers it. So Lincoln tried by creating a modern-day example or a real-life example, modern in terms of 1858, Lincoln says, look, if you're a farmer and you move into a new territory with a slave, even though there's supposed to be this principle of equality, and if the territory that this slave owner moved into has already voted to be a free state, really, the people who are trying to vote the territory to be a free state have no power. They can't have it their way. Instead, because of the Dred Scott decision, and because of the inability to legislate effectively against having slaves, really slaves can be taken anywhere, and those people who want to keep a territory free, they're left with no legal leg to stand on. And Lincoln is exposing Douglas's position as being hypocritical because Lincoln says, after all, look, there are many people who moved into, the territories hoping, when they were in the territorial condition, as you see here, where else would these free settlers have gone? Addressing those free settlers in the crowd, saying, you moved into the free territories to avoid the negative impact that slavery had on your wages. You moved to these free territories to make a better living for yourself. And if all of these territories all of a sudden vote to become slave states, certainly that's going to impact your ability to migrate. And that's what Lincoln points here. He uses that hypocritical sort of heuristical art to show how bad Douglas's position is, and really that the crowd, despite what Douglas says, they do have the right or the desire to find new homes and to be rid of the institution of slavery if they decide to move from Illinois and go to a territory further in the West. So if Douglas keeps focusing and keeps trying to tell the audience not to pay attention, they have no right to pay attention, he's ignoring the real truth of the matter, that the audience, their true feelings, they do have an interest in moving further westward. And if Douglas says, no, you should be paying attention to how other states are voting in popular sovereignty, he's completely undermining his argument that the expansion of slavery and how states vote under popular sovereignty is of no business of people already living in the states. The next example, we see the resemblance of Lincoln calling out a straw man argument without actually using the word straw man, and we see that represented here. Lincoln is essentially calling out Judge Douglas for trying to throw the audience off of the main topic of the debate, the expansion of slavery, and saying that Lincoln wants to advance perfect and social political equality between the black and white races. Now, eventually, Lincoln modifies his position, but at this point in his political career, Lincoln was not advocating for full equality. Rather, he just wanted to expand the Declaration of Independence's promises that all men are created equal, and every man has the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, to everyone regardless of race. And here we see Lincoln say these are false issues upon which Judge Douglas has tried to force controversy. So we see Lincoln in this debate calling him out, saying you're trying to, you're using the straw man argument, you're trying to get the audience off key here, but he's bringing the debate back to topic, and we see, as represented here, Lincoln immediately follows that recognition with another evolution of his thesis statement that the real issue of the controversy is the institution of slavery. And here we see Lincoln crank up the intensity a little bit, because he's not talking about just the institution of slavery spreading. He's saying that the institution of slavery is actually a moral wrong. And then he immediately couples that with, look, this is how the Republican Party interprets this issue. So you see here Lincoln saying the expansion of slavery, we're fighting against it, and here's why we're fighting against it. We're fighting against it because it is a moral wrong. The Republican Party, he now puts the Republican Party on the moral high ground by keeping slavery penned up, by keeping slavery out of the territories and recognizing it as a moral wrong. So you see Douglas's attempt to get people to focus on social and political equality. Lincoln really uses that to kind of backfire that argument and get the audience to focus on Lincoln's point that, hey, the expansion of slavery is wrong. Lincoln is not advocating for full political and social equality. Rather, let's focus on the issue being keeping slavery's expansion keeping slavery from expanding, and recognizing slavery as a moral wrong.